Good morning, everyone. As we all get admitted, get our audio and video all set up, I'll welcome you as you come in. Welcome to WorldCity's Pharr Trade Trends, a look at 2020 trade and a 2021 trade update. This webinar would not be possible without the incredible support of Pharr International Bridge, led by Luis Bazan, but with Fred Bowen and Freddie Flores, Cleo Salinas and Vanessa Guzman and many other people who do such an incredible job there and are so supportive in helping us put on this event. In addition, this event would not be a success without the supporting sponsors, the Mid-Valley Customs Brokers Association, the National Association of Custom Brokers and Forwarders, and the North America Strategy for Competitiveness. So thank you to them as well for helping us promote this event. My name is Ken Roberts, for those of you who don't know me. Joining me a little bit later on will be Guillermo Malpika, who's the Undersecretary of Industry and Trade, the Ministry of the Economy for the state of Puebla. A little bit about me, you'll see on the screen here. First thing you need to know is I really love trade data. And because of that, I'm a contributor to Forbes.com 5 times a month on international trade. I completed my second 3-year term as a member of the Federal Reserve's Trade and Transportation Advisory Board. I termed out. I speak on international trade for the last 10 months or so like this to groups around the country. And before this, I would actually go to those places, as we all did. In addition, our company, WorldCity, provides data analysis across multiple platforms for the international trade community. Some of those are, for example, from the upper left going clockwise. In addition to the Trade Trend webinar you're part of today, we do Trade Matters videos. In the bottom center, you see the Trade Talk e-newsletter we do on a monthly basis. We do one for the United States. We also do one for Texas. If you aren't receiving those, make sure to let us know and we'll be glad to add you to the distribution list for those. In addition, we do trade numbers publications. I've done them in more than 20 markets around the country. We're now hard at work on the one for Pharr for 2021. It is done obviously in Spanish and in English. So if you have any questions at any point during this webinar, all you need to do is put your question in that Q&A queue that you should see on your screen there. We'll try to get to them as soon as we can. We try to monitor that closely. Either I will or my extremely capable helper, Tatiana Panzardi, who's running the PowerPoint slide here and will help me through the presentation. So thank you to Tatiana as well. So without further ado, we're going to do a quick trade overview. And throughout this presentation today, I'm going to be doing a number of poll questions to ask you for your thoughts. They are anonymous, so you don't get graded here. But it helps enforce what we're talking about today and helps it make it easier to remember some of these things. I should start by telling you all the data we're using is from the US Census Bureau, and all the data you will see on our website is from the US Census Bureau, and I'll explain that as we get to it. So I'm going to start by asking the first question of you, and let's go right here. We're going to launch that poll. Pharr and US trade with Mexico declined in 2020. Shouldn't be surprising to anyone. Go ahead and answer as you have. There you go. Over the last 5 years, how has Pharr's trade with Mexico grown relative to the US average? Is it 2 times slower, about the same, 4 times faster, or 8 times faster? And I'll give you just a few more minutes to answer that question, and then I'll share the results with you. So again, is Pharr's trade relative to other, the overall average of growth over the last 5 years in Mexico, 2 times slower, about the same, 4 times faster, or 8 times faster? And at the end, thank you everybody for joining us today. We're glad you're here, and we hope you learn a lot and enjoy the presentation today from both me and from our speaker, Guillermo. It will be, I think, really interesting. So I'm going to end this poll here and share those results with you. A number of you got your votes in. And the top answer was 61% was 4 times faster. The second was about the same. Interestingly enough, the correct answer, and I want you to remember this as we go through the data for 2020, the correct answer is actually 8 times faster. That's right, 8 times faster. It's So let me share those results with you. There you go. So 8 times faster is the correct answer to that question. So let's now look at what 2020 looked like, okay? So here's 2020 compared to 2019. There was a 9.9% decrease in total trade between 2019 and 2020. US total trade decreased 9%, and US trade with Mexico increased 9.1% during that time. So Pharr is sort of right in there with, in the mix, right? A little underperforming, but not very much, okay? Total exports from Pharr fell 12.35%, and total imports were off 8.55%. I'll give you a few other quick bullet points. So remember on that poll, Pharr's trade over the last 5 years with Mexico grew 8.58%. US trade during that time grew up just a little bit more than 1%. And the top 10 ports that trade with Pharr account for about 85% of all trade. So Pharr's trade with Mexico over the last 5 years was up 2.5 billion. And that was second only to Port Laredo, which is from obviously a much larger base. Pharr also accounted for 5.9% of all US-Mexico trade. That's the highest percentage since 2019. Pharr's trade has grown with Mexico 9 of the last 11 years. Now take that 33.1 billion figure, which is the total trade of Pharr, 96% of it was with Mexico, and grow that number 9 of the next 11 years. You can only imagine what that's going to mean for Pharr, right? And as I said, Mexico accounted for 96% of Pharr's trade, has for the last 5 years. And in fact, before that, it was even a little bit higher. So let's take a quick look at our website here, and I'll show you how that works. And you'll have to just give me a second to get to the right screen here. Okay, so this is U.S. trade. What you're looking at here is ustradenumbers.com. And this is U.S. trade with the world, and each of these boxes represent the proportion of that trade in value, okay? So as you can see, and this is looking at 2019 now, I'm looking at 2019, as you can see here. Mexico, for the first time ever, ranked #1 among U.S. trade partners in 2019. That was largely due to the trade war with this country, China, okay? We fast forward to 2020, and we see China's back on top, Mexico's #2. I fully expect China and Mexico to remain 1 and 2 for years to come. Canada was #1 for a long time, but I fully expect these two will remain 1 and 2 for some time to come. Let's now take, and by the way, Pharr ranks #30 among all US airports, seaports, and border crossings. That's that top 6% I mentioned to you. Let's now look at US trade with Mexico. And what you can see, Port Laredo accounted for 37% of that trade, but Pharr ranks #4 for that trade. So a pretty impressive standing among all US airports, seaports, and border crossings. Okay, so we're going to now go to the export section. I'm going to have another poll question for you. Give me 1 second. This will be on exports. And here we go. That's 3 of Pharr's top 10 exports grew in value in 2020. Which one of the following is one of those 3? Is it motor vehicle parts? Is it pork? Or is it LNG and other petroleum gases? And I wonder if there's a problem here because we're not getting any responses yet, but maybe they're thinking. 3 of Pharr's top 10 exports grew in value in 2020. Which one of the following 3? Which one of the following is one of those 3? I'm going to relaunch because we didn't get any votes there, so there might be a little glitch in this thing. Can you guys, somebody help me out and tell me if you can? It won't let me click. Somebody. Oh, here we go. Now you're okay. Must have been a little glitch there, but now we're coming in. Okay. So again, if you're just now seeing it for the first time, 3 of Pharr's top 10 exports grew in value in 2020. Which one of the following is one of those 3? And if you think about what's going on in the global economy, there might be a clue there for you. I'll give you another 5 or 10 seconds here to put your answer in. Again, these are anonymous, and there's no test. We're not going to share these with your boss, your wife or husband, your children, your mother, your father, anybody. Okay, I'm going to end that poll and share the results. So the biggest number of you guessed LNG and other petroleum gases, about 44%, motor vehicle parts 36%, and pork was the number 3 answer. So unfortunately on this one, and somewhat intentionally, I stumped you with this one. The correct answer is pork, which got the lowest number of responses. And let's think for a minute about why that might be. The economy shut down in the second quarter of the year. So suddenly we know there was a massive impact on all sort of fuels, oil, gasoline, LNG, those exports and imports, the trade dropped. At the same time, the automotive industry took a big hit. But what did happen is people were eating at home more. And so that's where you're going to see the increase in pork. And I'm going to go back to our screen now, and we'll look at a couple of pages off our website so you can see some of that. So here is, let's scroll this down a little bit. By the way, I should mention, by the way, that the Pharr International Bridge page on our website is open to the public thanks to the sponsorship of Pharr International Bridge. It's also available on their website. So every month we're updating this data for Pharr and other airports and seaports around the country. But if you ever want to see the main page for Pharr, it's open to the public thanks to their sponsorship. So this is pork. So watch what happens. I'm going to go back to 2019. And what happened between 2019 and 2020? Well, China attacked certain U.S. exports during the trade war, and pork was one of those. So they stopped buying a lot of pork from the United States. But China is the largest producer of pigs, but it's also the largest consumer of pork. In 2020, that appetite could not be held back. So China once again became the top market for U.S. exports of pork. Mexico dropped to number 3. The percentage dropped a little bit because of the big increase into China. So to give you some example there, pork exports to the world last year were up 14.73%. To China, they were up 92.67%. To Mexico, they were actually down 5.36%. But, and this gets back to that poll question, from Pharr, those exports were up 15.1%. So let's now just, and the reason I open new tabs so you don't have to load the data so much. So here is now taking a look at, here's 2019. Pharr accounted for 22% of all the pork exports to Mexico. Okay, these are just to Mexico now. So Pharr's exports to Mexico of pork, 22% of the total. Let's go fast forward to 2020, 27% of the total. So that's where you see Pharr's increase, and that's the answer to your poll question. If we look at these are the total exports from Pharr, okay? Total exports. You can see LNG and other petroleum gases account for 22% of the total by value, but the three that increased in 2020 were electrical. This one here, electrical. Whoops, we don't want to do that. Electrical supplies and apparatus, and then compressors and pumps along with pork. Those two are certainly in the automotive industry, almost certainly, but those two are, those are the three that increased during the year. It was a particularly tough year in this category, TVs and computer monitors, okay? If you may have noticed, if we go back to 2019, here we are at 5% of the total, okay? And we bump it up to 2020, and it's down to 2.6% of the total. The exports from Pharr, and by the way, the exports from Pharr in this category are a lot of the set-top boxes and a lot of the apparatus that is used to watch TV, as well as the TVs and computer monitors in that category. But those exports dropped $359.9 million. Okay, that was a 55% drop, which is really a big drop. But U.S. exports in that category were down 38%. So it wasn't just Pharr by any stretch of the imagination. And as you can see, Pharr continued to rank number 2 in the nation for these exports, despite that big drop. So I would expect to see, as trade rebounds this year, you'll see some improvement in some of these numbers. So I'm going to now skip ahead and go to the import section, and now jump to a question from our import section. And that will be, whoops, let's see, stop sharing. Okay, relaunch, there you go. Okay, I'm hoping you can now see it. This import into Pharr grew more in value, 162.71 million, than any other in 2020. Is it strawberries, raspberries, and in the, which is primarily the Pharr imports, or blueberries? Is it saws, drills, and other hand tools, or is it tomatoes? Strawberries, raspberries, and blueberries, saws, drills, and other hand tools, or tomatoes? This import grew more in value than any other in 2020. I'll give you a few more seconds to answer this one, and then I'll show you the results. And I have to admit, I'm giving you some really tough questions today that it's stunning if anybody gets any of them right, because a lot of them go against what your preconceived notion might be. So I'm going to stop the poll and share the results. About half of you think it's the berries, strawberries, raspberries. Another third of you think it's tomatoes, and about 14% of you thought it was saws, drills, and other hand tools. So let's go to, we'll go to back to our website here, and we'll see what the correct answer actually is. Give me 1 second. The correct answer is not what you thought. It's saws, drills, and other hand tools. Now, why would that be? Let's think about those three categories that I gave you. This is a story, this story on imports is all about the pandemic, okay? In the pandemic, for the fortunate among us, we had time and money for home repairs. We had more meals at home with more fresh ingredients. And we also probably felt a squeeze on appliances, those of us who wanted to buy new appliances. So there were some shortages, but there was some real interest in doing some things that previously we'd not done. So let's go back to 2019. 2019, 2/3 of those imports came from one country, China, 11% from Mexico. In 2020, that increases slightly to Mexico, but the big increase is actually Vietnam. Vietnam went from, you won't even be able to see it if I go back to 2019. It's somewhere in here, and it usually takes me a while to find it, but Vietnam, I hope I get even the statistic right. Vietnam was 1/2 of 1,000th of 1% in 2019, now up to 11%, okay? And that shows you how the global economy works. We try to say let's corner this country, but then that trade can move, it can easily move. So let's look now at those saws, drills, and other hand tools. This is like, power screwdrivers and drills and things like that, obviously. So this is now looking at just those imports from Mexico. And what do you see? You see that Pharr accounts for more than 2/3 of those imports. So Pharr is a big player in that particular category. Now, I know a lot of you thought it was strawberries and raspberries, and with good reason. Pharr accounts for about 1/4 of all imports into the United States in the category of strawberries, blueberries, and raspberries. And it would actually be higher if you just looked at strawberries and raspberries, because Pharr doesn't do nearly as many blueberries as it does of the other two. But Pharr ranks #1 in the country for those, and did rank #1 in the country the previous year. Laredo jumped up, obviously, and Otay Mesa dropped down a little bit, but Pharr remains the #1 market for those imports. Let's take a quick look at tomatoes. And here again, you see the same thing. Pharr ranks #3 with 21%, so a big player in the tomato market as well. It was about the same last year, so lost a percentage point, but insignificant change there. But one thing to watch here, watch this little here. This is Roma, okay? Roma is sort of between Pharr and Laredo, obviously. So there it is down there in 2019 at whatever that is, 1/100th of 1%. And in 2020, it jumped up to almost 2%, okay? So that's a quick look at, and here's a quick overview of the leading imports into Pharr, things that are quite familiar to many of you: TVs and computer monitors, avocados, which is quite familiar. There's the strawberries and raspberries, motor vehicle parts, tough year, medical instruments, also a tough year, insulated wire and cable. There's the saws, there's the tomatoes, and cell phones and related equipment. Those are the leading imports into Pharr, again, almost exclusively from Mexico. So at this point, I would like to welcome to the stage Guillermo Malpica, As I mentioned earlier, he's the Undersecretary of Industry and Trade for the Ministry of the Economy for Puebla State. Guillermo has more than 2 decades of experience in international trade, investments, international trade negotiations, former Director General of the American Chamber of Commerce in Monterrey. He's held key positions with the Ministry of the Economy in Washington, D.C., and that's where he was very active in the USMCA negotiations. He's a Ministry of the Economy. He was worked for the Ministry of the Economy for the permanent mission of Mexico to the World Trade Organization in Geneva and the Mexican NAFTA office in Ottawa, Canada. So I want to welcome Guillermo to the stage. And to start off, we'll of course have to have a poll question for Guillermo. And let me get that up on the screen. That question is this one here. And you should be able to see it now. Let's see what our audience thinks about this one, Guillermo. The USMCA is a significant improvement over NAFTA. It's an improvement over NAFTA. It's not much different from NAFTA, and it's not as good as NAFTA. And let's see what we got in our audience. And then this one, again, there's no right or wrong answer here. Guillermo will just give you his opinion on that. And I'll share those results in just a minute. We'll let a few more people jump in with their responses. And I look forward to hearing Guillermo's comments. Guillermo and I've had a discussion or two prior to this, and I think you're going to really enjoy hearing what he has to say. Okay, so I'm going to end that poll, and I'm going to share those results. Guillermo, this is what they say. About half say it was an improvement. Another 14% say significant improvement. A third said not much different, and a small number one said it was not as good as NAFTA. So what do you think, Guillermo? And by the way, welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much, Ken, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you and with your audience in Pharr today. Well, I think I tend to concur with the results of the poll. I think obviously the most economist-like answer would be it depends. No, it depends on the chapter. If we see a chapter on, there were something like 10 new chapters in the USMCA. So in that regard, I think we had an improvement. In some of the chapters, we modernized the provisions and the commitments. In others, I think we were better in NAFTA than we are now. For instance, investment, not a good chapter for the USMCA. It was much better in NAFTA. So in conclusion, I think it depends on the specific chapter. No, there were some improvements. Rules of origin is a matter that was extremely complicated, and I think we are still we need still to see what problems will come on the implementation side. No, the negotiation was very complex, and the implementation is going to be very interesting to follow.
Okay, so we'll, and then, by the way, again, a reminder, if you have a question, feel free to jump in with that question. We'll try to get to it. It could be on anything I said, or it can be on anything that Guillermo's saying. Anybody who wants to challenge him on his opinion on any of these, or challenge my statistics. But without that, I'm going to launch a second question. This will deal with what Guillermo talked about, was that rules of origin. So I'm going to launch a poll question for you on that. U.S. enforcement of the rules of origin and the hourly wage provisions in the automotive sector will increase U.S. competitiveness, will increase North American competitiveness, or will increase the price of cars. And you can only pick one. So I think. And we'll give people a few seconds to think about that. And I have to say, I'll be interested to see what their response is and to hear. And Guillermo, when as you make comments on this is one where you could probably add some background on what those changes are in both areas, both rules of origin and hourly wages, and try to do it in a way that we can all understand, because I know you can go pretty deep into this stuff.
Yes.
Okay, so let's see what our audience says. They say pretty split. 41% say increased North American competitiveness. About the same say increase the price of cars, and then some say increase U.S. competitiveness. So now, are you going to say it depends, or what are you going to say on this one? What's your answer on this one?
I think it will
give some background too, Guillermo. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, I will. I think let me start by saying what was the negotiation of rules of origin in this case. We had in NAFTA a rule of origin that is a regional content of 62.5%. That means that parts of a car would be 62.5% from North America, from Mexico, US, and Canada, in order to apply tax-free treatment, basically. So what the US was seeking in this negotiation was a two-parts rule of origin. The first was to move up from 62.5 to 85% in regional content. And secondly, they were asking to have from that percentage, 50% from only US parts. That was not acceptable because, of course, the rule of origin has to do with the regional content, not with an individual country content. So we were not, Canada and Mexico were opposing to that position. At the end of the day, we had an increase in the rule of origin in the regional value content from 62.5 to 75%. And we have 3 years.
Let me ask you one quick question in that space. Yeah. That increase in that percentage was really targeting who? What country was that targeting?
Of course, it was an interest from the US to have that content going up. And for the car makers established in Mexico, it was really complicated.
But the reason was, I think they were trying to keep Chinese imports out of the market. No,
exactly. Let me tell you, there were two main objectives from the US in the negotiation, and one was precisely to bring investments back to the US, and the other one was to correct the balance, the trade balance between the US and Mexico, and between the US and Canada. So the idea of having this increase in the regional value content was precisely aiming at that objective. But there were two more elements in the rule of origin. One was to increase, there was a new element called the labor value content. And that was explained somehow like this. I mean, if from the parts of the car, 40% of those parts have to be produced in regions where the wage is, in average, $16 per hour. In Mexico, you know, well, of course, you have those wages in the US and Canada,
yep.
But in Mexico...
This was aimed squarely at Mexico then. So
of course,
part of it was aimed at China to keep their parts out. This part was to essentially make it very difficult for Mexico to...
Exactly, to comply with this rule of origin, no? And now it establishes 40%. Mexico is not now contributing with the 40% of the total content of a car. So perhaps Mexico still has some margin to grow without increasing their wages, no, in the sector. So that was acceptable, at least for a moment. And then we had the steel and aluminum component of the rule of origin. 70% of the steel and aluminum has to be from the region. We didn't have that rule in NAFTA. And that was not problematic for the moment because in Mexico, in Canada, and the US, we can basically comply with the new rule of origin. We were complying already without saying it. But in a few years' time, Mexico will need to produce steel from the very initial point of steel production, and not bring in the first part of the production, the first inputs from elsewhere. No,
okay.
But that's going to be tough in the 5-7 years that we are following. So in general terms, the ITC report, for instance, the ITC report that is always analyzing the impact of an FTA for the US, established that...
the ITC is the International Trade Commission, am I right?
Exactly, the International Trade Commission established that the USMCA would increase competitiveness of the region, but also it would increase slightly the prices of cars in the US due to the inability of bringing parts from other regions. So there's an impact in competitiveness in the long term, but there is a short-term impact in prices. So that's basically the answer. No, it will increase the competitiveness of the region, and for Mexico that has FTAs with Japan and with other regions in Europe, it will decrease the competitiveness of Mexico with those regions.
Okay, so how would you have answered that question then? Increase U.S. competitiveness, North American competitiveness, or increase the price of cars? If you could only answer one thing there, what would you have said?
I would say the first one, to increase the competitiveness of North America, because that's the long term result.
Okay, and then there's some question of whether in some instances at some point, and I think you've sort of answered this because of the a little bit, but there's some question of whether people will, companies will at some point decide, you know what, we'll just pay the tariff. It's not worth the higher wages or the rules of origin meeting those guidelines. What do you think is going to happen there over time? It might not be immediate, but over time, do you think people will fall into line with the regulations, or they might just say we'll pay the tariff? And the tariff would be what, 2.5%? I mean, I guess it varies, but overall tariffs average about 2.5% or something.
That is an important element, because for cars, the tariff is 2.5%. So many car makers could basically say, okay, we will pay the tariff. And in the long run, basically, they will try to comply with the rule of origin in order to save those 2.5% tariffs. But for light vehicles and for heavy vehicles, the tariff is 25%. So it's not that that cheap to follow that reasoning. So they will basically try to comply with the rule of origin for heavy vehicles and for light vehicles. For light vehicles, it's the same, 75%, and for heavy vehicles, it's going to be up to 70%.
Right.
So they will basically analyze this case by case, and there is also an exception embedded in the rules of origin chapter. You can apply if you are a car maker and you are having trouble to comply with the rule. You can apply for a transition mechanism, and basically, if you justify enough that you are going to invest in the future and so on, you can have an extension of the phasing period. Instead of having 3 years to comply with the rule, you will have 5 years for cars and 7 years for heavy vehicles.
I see. And the story of the light truck tariff is one that people often say, like, nobody even knows why it's still on the books. Can you give is there a way to do this, tell that story quickly of why the U.S. has this 25% tariff on cars, on pickup trucks?
Yeah. In a very short story, I mean, it has to do with the chicken tax, and there was a post-war kind of tariff war between Europe and the U.S., and there was a tariff on chicken coming from the U.S. into Europe, and then the U.S. decided to retaliate, having a high tariff on trucks, and that tariff still keeps in force after so many years. You don't see many European SUVs, for instance, in the U.S., and that's perhaps a reason, no?
SUVs, for those of you who don't know, SUVs are classified as trucks because they're built on a truck chassis.
Exactly.
And that's been on the books for decades, right?
From the 40s. Yeah.
So forever, it's been on the books forever, and that's why, you know, pickup truck sales of U.S. manufactured pickups are still so strong, but now they can be manufactured by any number of foreign companies who make those same trucks in the United States, because as many of you know, there's all sorts of most of the world's leading automakers manufacture vehicles in the United States now. So I'm going to jump on to another question here for you, Guillermo. And this one will be on labor, I guess we're going to jump to. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so here we go. The new labor regulations, including those on hourly wages, will be strongly enforced by the United States, somewhat enforced, or not really enforced. Let people jump in on that one, see what they think. And this was the hourly wage thing we're talking about. One thing that's worthy of note in USMCA, it was really a departure for the United States, because for the first time, the United States was willing to play a role in another country's wages and even in their environmental standards. And the general perception is you will see that continue in the Biden administration. And part of the reason that happened is President Trump, to get USMCA through the Congress, needed to appease some of the Democratic leadership, and that's where that sort of entered in toward the end of the negotiations. Because at that point, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Guillermo, but I believe both the U.S. and both Canada and Mexico had already approved the deal. So let's see what we got here. I'm going to end this poll now and share the results with you guys. and it's sort of tied between strongly enforced and enforced somewhat. And what do you have to say on that one, Guillermo? How's that going to go?
I think in general terms, all rules related to labor market will be strongly enforced. We don't have in the USMCA, there was an initial idea from the US to have a specific provision establishing the level of the wages in North America, but that was not accepted. That was not even presented by the US. That was only at the level of ideas. But there is this component in the rule of origin for cars, no, the labor value content, and there is of course a very strong labor chapter in the USMCA, which is different from the treatment that labor received in the original agreement. In NAFTA, we didn't have a chapter on labor. We went to the Congress, and it's very similar. The story with the Congress is very similar. The U.S. Congress didn't wanted to pass the NAFTA agreement because it didn't have any labor provisions. It was the change of government between Bush, I think, and Clinton,
yep.
if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And so the Congress was asking for provisions on labor and environment, and the result was side agreements, not opening the text, but side agreements. The problem with side agreements on labor and environment in NAFTA was that they didn't have any dispute resolution mechanism, and that was a problem. If a party was not complying with the rules, nobody cared about it. No? Now it is part of the USMCA. We have a strong chapter there, which is subject to dispute settlement mechanisms in the USMCA. And Mexico came from a very radical reform in labor, and that's why we were able to comply with the new chapter in TPP and also in the USMCA. But that was a strong. You are correct. I mean, that was a strong ask from the Democrats during the negotiation, and they are going to be very interested in having it comply.
Let's talk quickly about another couple of items that are particularly going to be important to Pharr and the people who trade in and around Pharr. And one of those will be energy, and one of those will be perishables. We can also talk about e-commerce, because e-commerce, of course, didn't exist when NAFTA was passed. But let's talk first about perishables. Anything new in that space? Were there attempts to change things, and what happened there? Because Pharr does an extraordinary amount of imports of not just berries and not just tomatoes, but all sorts of cabbage and broccoli and bean. I mean, just it's an enormous amount of perishables that are moving through Pharr on a regular basis.
Yeah, there was a discussion. First of all, the idea was to keep the preferential treatment from NAFTA in force, and that was positive in that regard. But with respect to perishables, there was an initial idea, also not really a written proposal from the U.S., to limit the ability of the Mexican exporters and Canadian exporters to export some kinds of perishables depending on the season in the U.S. Basically, trying to protect the producers from the U.S. And that was basically inconsistent with some of our commitments in the WTO and in the NAFTA agreement. So at the end of the day, they didn't present a proposal like that. But it was a strong ask from some people at the Congress, at the U.S. Congress, and in the same logic that you were describing. Trump administration wanted to have enough votes to pass the USMCA, and they were giving consideration to those ideas from different Congress people. So that was an initiative from the Congress that didn't materialize into concrete text. It is not part of the USMCA, but now we have seen, now that the USMCA is in force, we have seen new attempts from the Congress to try to pass some initiatives basically asking the same. And there was an investigation for Mexican berries started a few months ago that concluded that they were not basically inconsistent with the rules of trade. But I think we are going to see periodically, depending on the political cycles in the US, these ideas of having initiatives attempting to have these rules on perishable goods.
Okay, so not any real significant changes then for anybody in the perishable space. Now, in the energy space, as you saw when I looked at the leading imports by value into Pharr, LNG and other petroleum gases ranked #1 with about 22% of that total. With your former boss no longer in, Peña Nieto and AMLO in, I think there have been some concerns about there might be some moves to move back toward nationalization of the energy industry. When we talked last, you said there were some, I don't want to say trap doors, but there's some language in the document that probably makes that difficult. Why don't you explain that to help people understand what's going on there?
Sure. Energy negotiation was a very interesting story. At the beginning, the three countries were seeking to have a very new chapter on energy, because in the original NAFTA, Mexico was excluded because at that time, Mexico was not open to private participation in energy. Now, after the energy reform in Mexico, we were ready to have a tri-national chapter on energy cooperation and security and exchange of good practices. It was a very good chapter, but when there was a change of government in Mexico in July 2018, the new team, the team of President López Obrador, came to the negotiation table in Washington asking for a change in energy. Of course, that was very difficult to accept by the US mainly, but also by Canada. And at the end of the day, we have a very subtle, if I can tell that word, or hidden provision in one of the chapters, in one of the last chapters of the USMCA, in chapter 32, regarding exceptions, where you can see that Mexico is making commitments in energy depending on the commitments made in the TPP or in the CPTPP. In other words, it doesn't say Mexico is making commitments.
You should tell them what TPP is, just in case.
Yeah, of course. TPP is an agreement that we were just concluding 2 years before USMCA, and it's Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was originally an agreement between among 12 countries, including the US. And the first act of government of President Trump was precisely to jump out from TPP. The result is a new agreement only with 11 members, which is called CPTPP, which is now in force. So the commitments in energy from Mexico are coming from the CPTPP, but they apply to the USMCA. So that's a very legal way to put it in a hidden manner, in order to still protect investors and trade on energy goods coming from Mexico. So if there is a change like the one we are observing now in the current administration in Mexico, they will have to take a very close look at that specific provision in Chapter 32, because they cannot backtrack in the liberalization decisions.
Okay. Any other points from USMCA that you think are worthy of mention, whether it's e-commerce, or is there anything that you wish could have been part of USMCA that just couldn't get over the finish line?
I think there was an opportunity to increase ambition in the provisions regarding trading services, but that's a whole new discussion. I mean, we had good chapters on trading services. We don't have good measurements of trading services in general. In Mexico, we have a very poor group of statistics to really measure where we have potential in trading services. But in terms of digital trade, I think it's going to be an interesting opportunity. The pandemic was a proof that the digital trade is basically growing at a very high rate, and we have a strong chapter with strong provisions for digital trade, basically facilitating the growth, the natural growth of digital trade, with provisions regarding free flow of data, the prohibition of having forced localization of servers in one specific country, protection to developers of applications, with a provision prohibiting to disclose the source code of a specific software if you are intending to sell it into a country. So it's basically a strong chapter facilitating the growth of digital trade.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the columns I wrote for Forbes recently was sort of 4 things the Biden administration can do to sort of improve decision making on trade, and one of those was getting your arms around trade and services, because even in this country, first of all, it's very hard to measure accurately, but I don't have any confidence that anybody anywhere does it very accurately, because trade and services, for those of you who don't think about this a lot, can be as simple as somebody who comes from one country to another country to get a college degree. So if someone comes to the United States from Mexico to get a college degree, or someone goes, well, let's keep it that way for now, that's a U.S. export, because that person from Mexico has taken money and put it into the United States, right? So if somebody goes from the United States Tech to Monterey, it's an export for Mexico. Saying, flip the side, but it includes tourism, it includes legal services, it includes accounting services, it includes consulting services. There's so many things that includes, and they're so difficult to measure accurately, because they just are. I mean, who's going to ask an attorney what percentage of your hours were spent on international business and with what country? So it's a very tricky space, but it would really help people understand that trade is not just in. And by the way, so all the data that you saw from me was what they call merchandise trade, right? It was merchandise trade, and it was a movement of goods where it passed through. In this case, it was through Pharr. So I got a question here. Let me see this. Published reports from my good friend Robert Barcelo of Port Everglades. Published reports claim USMCA will greatly increase Mexico's competitiveness in an effort to attract manufacturing jobs from China and take advantage of current nearshoring trends in the US. Do you share this opinion? And that's going to be for you.
Thank you for the question. I think that is not only, I not only agree, but that is already happening. I am now working in a state level government, and we are experiencing new investments coming from China and other Asia countries as a result of the pandemic and this fear of having very far away supply chains, and also because of the certainty that the USMCA provides. So we are already having investments in Puebla and in Mexico in general, let's say returning from Asia. No? To have and we are basically selling the idea that Mexico is a nearshoring option for companies. No?
Yeah. I have one last question for you. A number of the border towns on the U.S. side have experienced significant downturns in their economy from the fact that the Mexicans are not coming across during the day to do their shopping because of pandemic-related restrictions. Where do you see that going?
I think it's going to be extremely difficult to come back to the original state of flows of tourists traveling to do shopping in the U.S. But at some point we're going to need to start reactivating that part. I mean, it's the last part that is going to be reactivated. I think the flow of people, because of the differences in the pace of application of vaccines. In Mexico, we are going very slow in the application of vaccines, and as long as we don't have a sufficient percentage of people immunized, it's going to be difficult to have the borders open. That's my view.
Yeah. So long term, because we will move through this over time, I presume. Long term, what's your feeling about U.S.-Mexico trade vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Vietnam? I mean, I don't know about you, but I do see Vietnam as probably as big a contender as anybody new. I mean, when you look at who are the big manufacturers, U.S. is, by the way, a very large manufacturer. We sometimes don't realize that. But when you look at China, Mexico, Vietnam, how do you see Mexico 5-10 years down the road?
That's a very interesting question. I think we have done the job in terms of the framework to continue being an important player in trade with the U.S. But it's going to be extremely important to continue doing the internal job of pursuing the structural reforms in Mexico to facilitate business in Mexico, to continue opening the markets, to have a look on security issues in Mexico. So we have to do the internal job if we don't want to lose our position with respect to the U.S. trade, I think. because China and Vietnam are already negotiating free trade agreements.
Yeah. I wonder if at some point Mexico, almost like China has done, where China has sort of pushed off some of the lower end manufacturing to Southeast Asia. I wonder if Mexico at some point would do some of that to Central America, for example, and try to do the automotive, do the aeronautic, and focus on those things. I don't know.
I don't know. That's an option, because we have an FTA with the Central American countries, and we can basically do that extension. Yeah.
Here's one last question before we close out. Any particular manufacturing sector will any particular manufacturing sector be pushed by Mexico's current government?
By
López Obrador.
By López Obrador, I don't think so. Let me be very frank with you. I don't think the current government is has a high interest in free trade. They are basically letting things happen, but they don't have a specific strategy pushing a specific sector of manufacturing. That is not the case of the states. The states in Mexico, they do have a very specific strategy regarding specific manufacturing sectors. I can talk about Puebla, for instance. Puebla is trying to push for, of course, automotive, because we have Volkswagen, Audi plants in Puebla, but also textiles and also IT-related sectors to increase the Industry 4.0 manufacturing processes in Puebla. We have we are the state with the largest number of universities and research centers. So we are trying to take advantage of the industry that we already have there to push for alternative industry that might need these technologies. So now that we are having a very unique federal government, the role of states is increasing in Mexico.
And here's, I got one more question for you here. Any major increase, the entrance of Mexican trucks into the U.S. compared to NAFTA? I don't know if you know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very long story. I was taking part of the negotiations to open the market of transportation from Mexico into the U.S. And now it was preserved in the USMCA. But we have had trade during 20 years without having these permits granted by the U.S. Department of Transportation. So relations are there. But basically, what companies are doing, they have a company established in Mexico, and the same owner has a company established in the U.S. And they basically do the transportation that way. I don't see a huge increase in trucks coming from Mexico as a result of the USMCA. I think that the flow is going to continue being the same and the procedure is going to be the same as before.
Yeah, and the example you just gave, and it's sort of the example I gave in looking at the hand tools that have gone from China to Vietnam. You know, we try all sorts of things to put rules and regulations up, but sometimes businesses figure into ways around those regulations, right? So as you said, the Mexican company opens a business in the United States, trucking on this side, they have it on that side, they transfer it from their Mexico truck to their U.S. truck, and the result is essentially the same. No.
We have 4 million crossings northbound every year, so that's happening somehow.
Yeah, right. So Guillermo, if there are no more questions, I'm going to say thank you very much for your wonderful commentary. I think it's very helpful to the people in and around Pharr who are involved in international trade. Clearly, they need to understand the energy situation, the automotive situation, the labor implications. All these things are really important to them. So I want to thank you for your effort today. And I want to thank all the people who stuck with us on this presentation today and answered the questions. As I started, I will end with the same words. We could not have done this without the support of the Pharr International Bridge, led by Luis Bazan and his extremely capable staff. They're doing a great job in Pharr, and a very fast-growing port, and they're got some major expansion going on that we'll deal with probably in our next one of these Trade Trends webinars. And we could also not have done it without our supporting sponsors. Those again are the Mid-Valley Customs Brokers Association, the National Custom Broker and Freight Forwarders Association of America, and the North America Strategy for Competitiveness. If you want to reach us, we're pretty easy to reach. But you can certainly go to our website, ustradenumbers.com, but we're on all social channels, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and you can certainly shoot me an email if you have any questions. We will send a follow-up email to you that will include a link to a recording for this event, but we'll ask you to take just a moment to answer a few questions to help us make these things more compelling to you, better to you, and more useful to you. So thank you everybody for your attention today. I'm glad you're here, and have a good rest of the week. Stay safe.